So the first way of using watercolor, the traditional way, is called layered wash. And that is where we're going to learn this today, where you put down a simple wash and then you let it dry and you put a simple wash on top, see-through, and you continue to do that until you get a very realistic, vibrant, beautiful watercolor painting. And that would be the more realistic watercolor that you see. It's the hardest way to watercolor because each of those layers you're slowly building towards a final, and you've got to really think about what you're doing. In this method, you would grey lead sketch, you would do all your layers, and then you would most probably, when it dry, rub your grey lead off completely, and it would look like you just popped down a watercolor while you're having a nap. So the first way of using watercolor, the traditional method that we are really leaning on, that Callum's written this class for, is called pencil and wash, and that's where we use our drawing skills, which you guys have a very high drawing skill, and you draw well, and then you let watercolor support the drawing. So you can see in this little picture here, the drawing is so strong, the colours are allowed to bleed and intermix, and it still holds it. This artist has only used a slight bit of green and orange and yellow, 3 colours only. Looks lovely. If you are not yet in love with watercolour or you're not sure yet how to use it, this would be the best way for those of you who are developing a strong drawing skill. And this little fish head here, you can see that's another version of a pencil and wash where they've really done all their shading and done washes over it, so it doesn't feel like it's drawn. The washes make you think it's done in watercolour, but it's predominantly done in pencil, yes? And then we've got wet into wet. Now, wet into wet is where we saturate the paper and we let that watercolour bleed out in a more organic way where it falls out of the edges of the sketch and it interacts. Then you can do anything on top of a wet into wet. You could draw, but wet into wet is where you really want that bleed to be interesting. So you can do that by leaving hard edges and bleeding only into wet areas, or you can do it like this where you let everything interact and it's got a very messy, lovely texture. And then we've got wet in. And then the last one is pen and wash. And that is where you would do a light drawing, you would do all your washes, and then you'd finish with a strong render where that pen mark is really expressive. All right? I'd like you to think about pen and wash being about beautiful, fun, broken marks that show the texture of the banana. They're a bit looser. They don't keep going, so in some spots they're totally not there. In other spots they are there. You catching me? And so you get a little bit more of your mark making practice. Always in these little exercises, think of them like practice of finding your mark, practice of thinking about your mark, and go as far as you want to go with those marks. Up close, often you're aiming at tidy, but I would say pen and washes work the best when you've got beautiful expressive marks.